Hello, good morning, everybody. I'm going to turn my camera on just for a quick second. My name is Jacob Wickham, and I'm the editor of Integrative Zoology, and I'm also an academic trainer. This webinar has been brought to you by ReviewerCredits and also R Upskill. And the title of the webinar is Give Your Career a Boost with Peer Review, Case Studies and Personal Insights. So I'm going to turn my camera off because I'm actually in Beijing right now. There's a lot of internet users here and not a lot of bandwidth. So feel free to type your questions here in this chat box, and I will get to them at the end of the webinar. So I'd like to say hello to everyone. So just feel free to use that during the webinar. Here's about me. I've been the managing editor at Integrative Zoology for the past 7 years. The journal has really grown a lot. We have a pretty big following in the United States. And yep, thank you, Alessandro from Italy. I guess people are from all over the world here. So it's not just the United States. So hello, everyone in Europe and also in the US and those of you staying up late in China. About my journal editing experience, as managing editor, I handle roughly about 1/3 of all the manuscripts that are submitted to this journal. We're now ranked in the top 10% of zoology journals worldwide. So we've been getting a lot of submissions, and especially this past year with the COVID-19 pandemic. We've had a 300% increase in submissions. And it's made my job very difficult because I think finding from Indonesia, right? There's people from all over, India. So wonderful, we have a true worldwide audience, which is not surprising because I send reviewer invitations to all over the world. And so I handle a couple hundred manuscripts every year. So I deal with hundreds of reviewers. I have to get to agree to review these manuscripts. And that really is, if you ask any editor, the toughest part of the job is finding reviewers. Reviewer credits, they can be very helpful for helping you receive credit for the reviews you do. And also with R Upskill, there's even courses offered on how to become a great reviewer. And I'll get into the rating reviewers later in the talk. Anyways, my journal experience is just a part-time job for me. And I'm a professor of zoology at the Institute of Zoology, Chinese Academy of Sciences, and also an adjunct professor at Rutgers University. So I am like many of you, I'm a full-time researcher, and a lot of the editor positions, they're done on the side. Most editor-in-chiefs are actually full-time scientists. They're just doing this on the side. So that's enough about me. There's my contact information, support@upskill@researcher.life if you want to get in touch with me. So here's introduce R Upskill. There's a whole array of programs and courses that you can benefit from R Upskill. And this multifaceted service helps researchers get published in peer-reviewed journals. Neha just posted a link in the chat, so you can check that out. And there's all kinds of nice courses to develop your career and break through all these barriers that are in the way between you and getting yourself published in successful journals. And finally, I'd like to introduce our co-hosts, ReviewerCredits, for an innovative and independent platform for peer reviewers, supporting peer reviewers, and the peer review process. They help to validate your peer reviews. Like after you submit your review, you can send a copy of the reviewing acknowledgement to ReviewerCredits, and they will independently verify your review. They can give you a certificate for your review. Some journals will do that, but I'm really busy. I can't give a certificate to everybody that does a review for us. But that's why there's a great platform like ReviewerCredits. So it started in Italy at the University of Milan Bicocca, and it's a member of COPE. That's the Publication Ethics Committee, and they're also part of ORCID. So if you have your ORCID ID, that also helps you. You can register yourself on ReviewerCredits. And they've been a very good, enthusiastic partner of Cactus Editage since 2017. So here's an outline of the talk. First of all, I'd like to introduce what is peer review, who are the peer reviewers. For a lot of early career researchers, I'd like to talk about like how you get your first peer review experience, how to learn the ropes, how to become an effective peer reviewer, and then actually use it to your advantage, how to advance your career with peer review. And then I'll talk about how you can get recognized, get peer review recognition, besides the appreciation from the editors. I appreciate my reviewers very much. My job would be almost impossible without reviewers. And then I'll go over some case studies about communicating with editors, maybe even help write peer review of your review. I'll talk about some difficult papers like the manuscript treadmill. I like to call that the papers that get rejected and resubmitted. And I typically tried to find the same reviewers for those manuscripts, but that's not always possible. I'm always very appreciative of reviewers that can review resubmissions because they'll make all kinds of really great comments on the paper, and it's great that they're still available later to look at the author's replies. Otherwise, it'll just be me checking the author's replies, and I didn't make the comment in the beginning. So it's always best to have reviewers available to review resubmissions. Then I'll talk about lessons learned from my positive and negative experiences with peer reviewers. I would like to say that about 95% of the experiences I've had have been positive. I'll talk about how I advanced my own career with peer review, and finally talk about something that's affecting all of us, and that's peer review and COVID-19. And here, patience and flexibility is key, and also have a plan B for your paper, whether the paper you submitted or one that you're reviewing. So here's a great cartoon to start out with. I'm a big fan of using these cartoons and PhD comics. That always helps to help me look at peer review in different ways. The caption is, most scientists regard the new streamlined peer review process as quite an improvement. Well, actually, those guys that are brandishing the swords and chainsaws, and you even have death back there, the peer reviewers in general try to help the authors. It's like an altruistic behavior. And I've seen some papers that were okay before they were sent out for peer review, but after having gone through the peer review process, I've seen these okay papers turned into excellent papers. So one of the basic tenets of peer review is that the peer reviewers will offer a critique of the paper and offer advice how to improve the paper. And there's weaknesses in every paper, and it's actually the peer reviewer's job to find out those where those weaknesses are and give you suggestions on how to strengthen your paper. And we don't always get agreement with peer reviewers. So here's another funny comic. If fast food required scientific peer review. Each one of these reviewers is a little biased if you read the reviews. And it also shows the point that there rarely is there agreement between peer reviewers. So one of my jobs as an editor is I compile the reviews from the different reviewers. And usually they'll be in some agreement, but not in total agreement. We may have 2 reviewers recommend accept and 1 reject. Oftentimes the third reviewer is only included if there is a disagreement between the 2 reviewers, and we may seek an extra opinion. So a little message here: don't let yourself get biased. Try to look at the paper objectively. So first of all, what is peer review? Well, peer review started with the Journal of the Royal Society, the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society. And thanks, I'm glad you liked that comic. And peer review started in 1665. And at that point, its value was very difficult to measure. The peer-reviewed articles, they give the publisher confidence that the science has been examined and given a stamp of authority. So it goes through who are your peers? Your peers are your fellow colleagues, other professors. They could be a competing lab. The peer reviewers can be anyone that's deemed an expert in their field. And having gone through the peer review process, the article is given its stamp of approval, and makes the work more trustworthy. It corrects the errors that are made in the development of the article itself. And authors generally consider it their duty to serve the research community by giving up their own time to review their peers' work. So Maria, that's a great question. Can PhD students review research articles? Of course they can. The first time I got to review an article is when I was a PhD student, and that was with the help of a professor. Sometimes I ask potential reviewers, I said, feel free to ask a graduate student to get involved in their peer review process. It can be a nice learning experience. And here's some journal speak about peer review. The primary purpose of the review is to provide the editors with the information needed to reach a decision. So the review should not only help the editors reach their decision, but it should also instruct the authors how they can strengthen their paper to the point that it's acceptable. And why should you peer review? It can be good for your career. Actually, being able to critically read a scientific article is an important skill to have. And actually learning how to give constructive feedback, constructive criticisms on a paper is a very essential skill to have as a scientist. So why do it? Well, it's good for your career. It improves the quality of the articles published, provides an assessment of the science and the literature, and assists the editors. And peer reviewers actually act as the gatekeepers for unethical practices. I just had an article that I handled a couple weeks ago. It was on an endangered species, and the reviewer said, make sure that the authors have permission from the Chinese government that they can work on this endangered species, and then they had the permissions. So they help keep everyone honest. Actually, so Devani, it doesn't matter what journal you review for. It doesn't have to be high impact journals. It can be +1, scientific reports. It could be a society journal. Sometimes you'll get asked to review a high impact factor journal. But it just depends on the reviewer database, which I'll get into later in this talk. So most scientists do peer review over the course of their careers, and the activity is considered important when applying for positions. So keep track of what journals that you review for. You can put them on your resume. Also, at the end of the year, a lot of professors are asked to give a summary of what they've done that year, and they put in all the reviews that they have done for various journals. So actually, yeah, the peer reviewers, we do it for free. We give up our time for free. Some journals will actually give you a discount on their article processing charges if you peer review for them. For example, the MDPI journals. I reviewed for them, and then I got a discount on the article processing charges. So, yeah, I don't think it would be ethical to pay reviewers. So who are the peer reviewers? Peer reviewers, they do a valuable service to science. It's also important that it's carried out only by those that are qualified. Well, who's qualified to be a peer reviewer? So this can be, the qualifications can be drawn from years of academic and research experience. Usually the process of getting a master's or a PhD counts as having enough experience. Or it can be from practical experience in the field. So the peer reviewers can be PhD students, postdocs, professors, from assistant professor to full professor, or it can be any expert in an area regardless of the degree you have. And we really need peer reviewers. If you look at this table, these are the number of journals listed in these categories and the index of the science citations. And as you can see, like ecology has over 100 journals, zoology has about 150 journals, almost 200 plant science journals, and these are the number of articles that were published in the year 2012. So if you add those up, that's about 50,000 articles. Some might be cross-referenced in more than one category. But let's say that there's 50,000 articles. That's needed about 100,000 peer reviews. There's some peer reviewers that, they'll do an article a month. But that's a lot of peer reviewers that need to be tapped and need to be asked to provide reviews. So I said it before, I'll say it again. Finding quality peer reviewers is one of the toughest parts of my job. So here's another cartoon for you. How does peer review work? Reviewers give up their time for free to help and improve science in their field and help the authors. So the peer reviewers will comment on the novelty of the contribution. Most journals consider novelty to be an extremely important element to meet the criteria for publication. Because most of the high impact factor journals, they want to be cited and they want novel work to be published in their journals. There's a couple exceptions to that. PLOS ONE and Scientific Reports state that if the science is done correctly, even if you're reconfirming previous results, they'll still publish the paper so long as the science is done correctly. PLOS ONE and Scientific Reports, they don't have the best reputation in China because they've been criticized as being repositories for thesis chapters of Chinese master's and PhD dissertations. And actually my institute stopped counting them as publications. But that's kind of extreme. There's nothing wrong with those journals. They're excellent journals, and the sheer number of articles that are published every year, it's very high. I think there's hundreds of thousands of articles published every year. So here's a peer review worksheet. This is from PhD Comics. This is pretty funny. And it just has a little score sheet of point system. You can see the paper cites your work plus 20 points. Paper scoops your results minus 1,000. And then it has 3 levels of recommendations that you can make. But in reality, I'll go over what an editor expects from a peer reviewer and how you formulate a review. So thanks for answering the questions on reviewer credits. I'll get to other questions that are not answered. So thanks, Valeria. So the standards vary according to journal and the field and also the publisher. And most journals will have a minimum of 2 peer reviewers, but more is also common. I go under the assumption that one reviewer will be really late, or one reviewer will not give a very useful review. So I try to get 3 reviewers to agree. And if I have 2 solid reviews come in, I will move forward and make a decision. And I'll email that 3rd reviewer and I'll say that their review is not absolutely necessary. So I'll give them a chance to let them off the hook and they don't have to review. Or if they've already started the review and they wish to finish it, then I'm more than willing to wait a few days before I send out the decision letter. And sometimes I'll just go ahead and send the decision letter and I'll tell that reviewer if they want to just email me the review, I'll make sure that the review gets to the authors. There's a lot of different types of peer review nowadays. The most common type is single blind peer review. That's where the authors who do not know who reviewed their article, unless the reviewers choose to waive their anonymity by signing their review. At Integrative Zoology, we have double-blind peer review. And this is a system where the authors and the reviewers' identities are hidden from each other. So we ask the authors to have a separate title page to list their names and their affiliations, and we do not include that in the PDF that's built. And we also have them move their acknowledgements to the title page so the reviewers won't be able to guess who the authors are. This system is said to be a little more fair. I think some reviewers would be hesitant to reject a paper from a really big name in the field. So not knowing the authors is actually a good thing. It makes it more fair. And there may be some unknown authors that are doing great work. And they also will not be biased by the reviewers, having the reviewers maybe not knowing who they are. And finally, we have open peer review, and this is in the Frontiers family of journals. They have open peer review, where the reviewers' names will be published on the paper when the paper publishes. So you'll have the author's names, the reviewers' names will be published on the side, and then the editor's name will also be published. So double-blind peer review is becoming more common. A lot of the nature journals will offer double-blind peer review as an option. And there's other journals that are single-blind peer review. I've actually had a peer reviewer refuse to review for Integrative Zoology because he wanted to know who the authors were. And he said he likes the journal, but he just he couldn't review for us. So here's another comic about your first peer review experience. So here's a professor saying, "I've been asked to review this. Can you do it?" Gives it to a postdoc. And the postdoc says, "I've been asked to review this. Can you do it?" Goes to the PhD student. And then finally to the master student. The master student reads the paper to the fish and asks, "Is it good?" So, well, typically the major professor can either work with a postdoc or work hand in hand with a PhD student or a master student. I've actually asked professors to feel free to work with an early career researcher, and it'll be a great learning experience for that individual. And they'll actually turn their reviewer in together, and then I'll get the name of the master's or PhD student or postdoc, And the next time I had a paper, I would invite that person, even without the professor. So your first peer review experience can actually be guided by a professor, or maybe you have a very hands-off professor and he'll let you do the review on your own. With those, you might even get the link to upload the review, and you just submit it on the professor's behalf. But as an editor, I would rather know that it was done as a team with a postdoc or a PhD student. So when does your first assignment usually occur? So again, like the comic reflected, could be your PhD supervisor, or you may have recently published your first paper, so others in the field know who you are. They know that you're an expert in the field. And actually, every manuscript that I serve as handling editor on, there are reviewer suggestions given to me by Web of Science. And so if after you publish your first paper, you'll actually pop up as a potential reviewer. They'll look at the abstract of the paper submitted, and they'll look at the abstract of the paper you published. And if there's overlap, you'll be automatically suggested as a reviewer. And a lot of journals will encourage early career researchers. Again, I often inform potential reviewer that it's okay to complete the review with a graduate student since it'll be a great learning experience. You can also ask an editor to add you to their reviewer database. So Darwin has a good question. In the case of double-blind review, after finishing peer review and the articles have been published, can we open the name of the reviewers in which reviewed the manuscript? Actually, those are always kept secret. So just in case, well, it's double blind, but as a reviewer, you might be able to see who the authors are. So, that will be known, but usually the authors, unless the reviewers will come up to them like, hey, I reviewed your paper, they'll never know. And if you're really looking for a first assignment, just ask an editor to add you to their reviewer database and say that you're willing to review papers and tell them what your expertise is. So scientists provide competent peer review for free because members of the scientific community realize and collectively accept and value peer review as the backbone of science. And the ability to provide competent criticism is an important skill, and it is not easy to do so in a constructive fashion. So it's a great experience to learn how to peer review. Actually, R Upskill has some courses about how to be a great peer reviewer. But I will give you a little tutorial here on how to write a peer review for a scholarly journal. Basically, we're asked to give 3 main parts for your review. This is what I typically look for as an editor. First is a mini summary of the paper, and then that shows that you read and understood the paper. Then you list substantial criticisms. These can be major issues. And then finally, a line-by-line list of minor issues that you had. So there's another question here from Wakas. Does peer review mean that we have to offer some changes even though knowing the fact that it is well written scientifically? Well, if you critically review a paper, you'll always find something that maybe some small corrections, maybe some suggestions. You can offer suggestions, but not force your thinking on the authors. Usually, even the most well-written papers, there are some mistakes to be found in them, and those are caught having gone through the peer review process. So before you get together this mini summary, the substantial criticisms, and the minor issues with the paper, It's very helpful to critically read a paper, and I have a guide here on how to critically read any paper for either like a class discussion or before peer review. And so first of all, you should read the paper in its entirety. And second, it's useful to construct a short outline, 1 to 1.5 pages, to help you demonstrate that you read and understood the paper. Every paper should have an objective, a justification. You should be able to find a hypothesis in the paper. You'd be surprised how many papers don't have a hypothesis clearly stated. So that would be something that you should bring up in your review. You should also identify what the methods are, and then jot down the results, and then state the general conclusions of the paper. And then you can write down any questions or comments that you had. You can ask yourself questions. What are the strengths and weaknesses of the paper? If you're an editor, would you accept or reject the paper? You'll be asked to make a recommendation anyways. You don't have to say in your review whether you would accept it or reject it, because all you do is give a recommendation. It's the editors that make the decisions. So when you upload your review, typically there are 2 main parts. One is the confidential comments to the editor. If you don't have anything that you want to say to the editor, this is optional. You can just say none there and then list all your comments to the authors. But if you do have a certain issue or a concern that you feel should only be communicated to the editor, it could be like something ethical. You can write a note to the editor. And then the comments to the authors, this is mandatory. This is your review. I would recommend, since the web pages might time out, that you do your review in a word processing program, and then you can either copy and paste it from the word processing program or just upload it as a PDF or Word file. Some reviewers will annotate a PDF version of the manuscript. They'll put some notes in there. I've been emailed a lot of times about requests to get a Word copy of the manuscript so they can mark it up with track changes. I've seen a lot of reviewers do this, and they usually do it for papers where the authors are not native English speakers, and they're just helping with lots of small corrections. Don't forget, if you do that, make yourself anonymous in MS Word or make yourself anonymous on the PDF. And Dr. Isra asked, what is the benefit when some journals ask the authors to mention the name of the reviewer, but said the journal may not be used to select this reviewer, but the journal will make this a condition of accepting the paper or not? Okay, usually when you submit an article, we ask authors to recommend reviewers for the articles. Sometimes journals will use the recommended reviewers, but more oftentimes they will not use the recommended reviewers because the authors might recommend friends or colleagues. If I have a paper submitted from China, I would not use the recommended reviewers if they're from China. So I like to invite one reviewer from China and maybe one reviewer from outside China. Sometimes the authors will oppose reviewers because of a conflict of interest. Some of the really high-end journals, like Nature and Science, might take that as a cue to invite that reviewer. But at the journal where I work, at Integrative Zoology, I will respect the author's listing a reviewer as an opposed reviewer. Usually it is a conflict of interest. So after you upload your review or in the process of making your recommendation, you'll be asked to select from a list, and it'll be journal-specific score sheet. They might have some special questions. In Integrative Zoology, we always ask reviewers, does the work draw from more than one branch of zoology, because we like to see integrative manuscripts that integrate multiple fields. We also ask, does the paper have global appeal or just regional appeal? So you may have a special list, a special score sheet to fill out. And of course, then you can check the box with your recommendation. So here's how to write a peer review. You have a mini summary. This can be like 100, 150 words. You can start your justification with a mini summary of the manuscript that shows that you read the paper and you understood its main points. It also demonstrates your competence. It shows that you're now an expert. You read and understood the paper. And they can make statements about the significance of the paper and the strengths of the paper. You can also comment on the fit for the readership of the journal. And then, of course, it really gives you credibility. It shows that you read and understood the paper, both to the authors and the editors. So you want to list the substantial criticisms. Maybe you won't have any, but typically reviewers will comment like, this is a major concern, and then state the concern and also give some suggestions on how to remedy, how to fix the concern. So you can state and justify the criticisms. You can be direct, be honest, and be rigorous. Do not disparage the authors. Do not demean them. Do not be sarcastic. You want to show humility. Be polite when you're making these criticisms. So these can be listed or numbered out in your review, and that makes the criticisms easy to reply to, easy to respond to when the authors are revising and then responding to your comments in the responding letters. So if possible, when you're being critical, suggest a way to resolve or avoid the problem in revision without forcing your thinking on the authors. And you can ask yourself these questions. Is the hypothesis stated clearly? Again, I'm surprised how many papers don't have clearly stated hypotheses. Is the approach logical and appropriate to test the hypothesis? Are the methods adequate to firmly establish what is being claimed? Is it reproducible? Can someone repeat the experiment with the information provided? And are the results discussed in the proper context of existing knowledge? So that's about the discussion. Are the results trustworthy? So to look at, are the sample sizes big enough? Was the data analysis done appropriately? And finally, is the conclusion valid? So you want to be able to justify your conclusions with the data that are in the paper. You don't want to overstretch the conclusions beyond what the data actually show. That's a major point that we ask the reviewers to analyze. And finally, you can list the minor issues. So this can be formatting issues, could be references, and here's line by line, specific line numbers or figure numbers and tables. And then finally, if you have a concluding statement or closing remark, you can list that at the end of the paper. So how to become an effective peer reviewer? So if you have not reviewed for a particular journal before, and if you get asked to review, you should go to the journal's webpage and read the aims and scope of the journal, and also consult the reviewer guidelines if they have any. And also look at the form the journal asked reviewers to complete to find out which questions you're expected to answer and other specific issues that you'd be asked to comment upon. So the majority of your report will be free text, comments to the authors, and then confidential comments to the editor. And before looking in detail at each section in the article, you should read the article from start to finish. Actually, you'll be presented with an abstract before you agree to review. So you'll have to make the decision whether you want to review it based on reading the abstract. So after you click the button that you agree, you want to read the article from start to finish and give you an overview and provide a clear understanding of everything that the research article covers. At the invitation stage, when you're invited to review an article, here are some key questions to consider before accepting the invitation. Does the subject area of the article match your expertise? So even with Web of Science, matching up the authors and reviewers, the reviewer might not always be the expert of the paper that they're being asked to review. So if some articles are difficult to review, they may be multidisciplinary. So you might want to just write a brief comment to the editor that it's like, oh, I'm not a molecular biologist, but I understand the theory and population ecology. Or maybe it might be a modeling paper. You may say, you hope the other reviewer has some modeling experience. So it is okay if you don't have perfect overlap of expertise. Another important question is, do you have time to review the article? Many journals will ask for articles to be reviewed within 2 to 3 weeks. Others request shorter turnaround times. I'm surprised at some of the MDPI journals. They want a review back within a week. And this is an open access journal. So you want to be realistic. We'd rather have you say no and decline rather than take on too many reviews or a review that you cannot return in a proper amount of time. And finally, we'd like to know if you have any conflicts of interest that might prohibit you from reviewing the article objectively. You may have collaborated with some of the authors, if you know the authors, or you may have stopped collaborating recently with the authors. Or maybe the author is a former colleague or a PhD student. Or you may have a conflict of interest that you're from a competing lab and you're working on the same system. And finally, you want to ask yourself, do I really want to review the article? And here are some basic principles how to be an effective peer reviewer. Always treat the paper with the utmost confidentiality. Don't show it to any colleagues. Don't communicate with the authors. Communicate with the editorial office if you have any questions. You want to take an objective, independent approach to the work and putting aside subjective feelings about the topic and the authors, if you know the authors. So look at it objectively and independently. Be attentive to your task, as it will influence the decision that the editors make on the article. And it may have an impact on the career of the authors or the reputation of the journal. I love it when the reviewers, they're looking at the journal from the journal's perspective, or looking at the article from the journal's perspective. And, does this paper deserve to be published in a high impact factor journal? They'll often ask that question. Don't forget, your role is to improve the science in scholarly publications and provide constructive criticisms of the article. You want to provide evidence where appropriate for the statements you make in your report. You might even cite other papers. Be careful when writing a report and use simple language. The authors can understand your comments, even if English is not their first language. And always try to conduct the review professionally, courteously, collegially, and politely. And don't forget, never contact the authors directly. Have all your correspondence go through the editorial office. So I'll take a quick question now. May I ask a question? What is a conflict of interest in the peer review process of the reviewer? Conflict of interest could be you're working on the same topic, and conflict of interest may be you had a falling out with the authors. You don't get along with them anymore. It can be that a former student or a former postdoc. It could be a collaborator. that would be a conflict of interest. So, and here are some additional resources to be an effective peer reviewer. There's guides to peer review that are made from a lot of societies and journals. And this is a wonderful guide by the British Ecological Society on how to peer review. So they have a lot of experience helping early career researchers become great peer reviewers. So that's one of the great things about nonprofit societies. Also, R Upskill has a lot of partner resources. These are some tips on how to become a peer reviewer. You can follow these links, especially for the first-time peer reviewers or early career peer reviewers. There's a lot of great advice on how to be an effective peer reviewer. And here are some peer review tips and common mistakes. So there's no wrong or right way to do a review. So as long as you provide enough constructive information to both the editors and the authors, and hopefully a lot of helpful comments for the authors. Please be on time. However, editors prefer a slightly late, well done review over a hurriedly prepared review that is not very useful. So I actually have a letter I send to the reviewers on the day the review is due, and I ask them, please take your time. I'd rather take a late review that is well done than one that's prepared at the last minute. And the worst reviewer is the one that keeps promising to complete the review and never does. This delays the review process. It delays the publication. Often the editor will be forced to remove the reviewer or just proceed to make a decision without the review. So thanks, Naha, for posting those links. So if you did agree to review a paper and you just can't do it, just be honest. Just send an email to the editorial office or to the editor and say, I just can't do it. I'm totally swamped. It happens all the time. And I'm frankly thankful for their honesty. Some editors might be a little irritated, but it's okay. It happens. We understand there's a lot of demands on your time. So advancing your career with peer review. So this can be done with ReviewerCredits. And my screen froze. Hopefully this will keep going. All right, there we go. So peer review recognition. So getting credit for review and your reviewer credits. Some journals will publish names of the reviewers in the last issue of the year. Here's a reviewer thank you from the editors of Clinical Neurophysiology, and they just listed all the names of all the reviewers that reviewed the manuscripts. Other journals may give you a reviewing certificate upon request, but note that editorial offices may be too busy. Regarding plagiarism checking, it's the responsibility of the editorial office, and we have a special program that does that. So sometimes the reviewers will say, hey, they copied and pasted the first sentence from this paper. You might want to check the plagiarism. That'll be a note to the editor. But yeah, plagiarism is automatically checked by the editorial office. So and here is ReviewerCredits. So if you go onto their website and you register your ORCID ID, you can claim your reviews by clicking on this button. Let's see. And here is a small little video tutorial how to claim your review. So Naha, if you can play that. Thank you. And don't forget, registration is free on ReviewerCredits. So great, you can see how easy that is. You should have a handling editor that communicated with you. It could be the editor-in-chief as well. And they will help to verify your review. So reviewer credits can work with journal editors and the editorial office. And sometimes it can actually rate your review. And that's what I did, actually. I asked an editor to rate my review, and I got categorized as an excellent peer reviewer. And actually, when I have a new manuscript that's submitted to me, and Web of Science will suggest reviewers. There'll also be verified reviews from those suggested reviewers. So not only does it match up reviewers with your publication record on Web of Science, but it'll also match up reviewers with how many verified reviews that you have. So actually, it's a very, very useful tool for the editors and the journals as well, is giving credit to the reviewers. And then here's a little screenshot of what I see. I can rate reviewers just internally at the journal based on how good quality their assessment was and their timeliness. And it computes an R score. So every reviewer will have their own R score in our system. If they're just a little late, I'll just say that they're on time anyways, because I understand that it's not always easy to get your reviews on time, and I'm thankful to receive the review even if it's a little late. Here's a case study 2. This is the case of the manuscript treadmill. So it's really important to be available to review resubmissions. I know that's not always possible, especially if the authors are not listening to you and not following your suggestions. But in general, for consistency, if major revisions are required, it makes it easier for the editorial office to rely on the previous reviewers. Otherwise, the editor will have to check the author's responses. And that's for major revisions. If you only suggest minor revisions, typically editors will not want to bother these reviewers, and if it's only minor revisions. It is pretty easy for the editors to check the author's responses and then editorially accept the paper without having to send it out for peer review again. So a lot of the high impact factor journals, they'll work much more quickly because the editors will, especially for minor revisions, be able to check the responses. And it's actually up to the authors to give very good line-by-line responses that can be easily checked by the editor. So here's a little score sheet that the reviewers check. So they recommended major revision, and then they check yes if they're willing to review a revised manuscript. For resubmissions, these are articles that are rejected and resubmission is encouraged. The journal will often invite both the previous reviewers and then a third new reviewer. And one more thing I wanted to say on the manuscript treadmill. Oftentimes, I'll send reviewer invitations for a newly submitted manuscript. And the reviewers, they will say, I've seen this manuscript 4 or 5 times, and it got rejected from other journals. And the authors are still not listening to my comments or revising the paper according to my comments. That's also it's the fault of the authors, but it also shows it's a small world out there that multiple journals will be asking the same reviewers to review the papers. So here's some lessons I wanted to share with positive and negative experiences with peer reviewers. Some reviewers they tend to get irritated about too many automated emails. Other reviewers, they're thankful how gentle the late review reminders are for Integrative Zoology compared to other journals. And actually, I wrote this, and this is the email that reviewers get on the day their review is due. And I just give them the chance to, hey, take your time. I'd rather have a quality review that is slightly delayed rather than a rushed review that is hurriedly prepared. And I also give them the option to opt out. So I say, however, if you cannot review the manuscript or think you might have a conflict of interest, or if your review is likely to be delayed for an extensive period, please notify me. I try to be gentle and understanding here. So many reviewers, they'll get irritated by authors that ignore their comments from previous reviews at that journal or from other journals. And also, some reviewers, they're curious. They wonder how useful their reviews were. Hello. Okay, I'm back here. So thanks for hanging in there. So basically what I was wrapping up on, a lot of reviewers are just curious. They wonder how useful their reviews were. Some journals will actually send a copy of the decision letter to their reviewers, or they'll just send you a copy of the decision letter after a final decision has been reached, and then thank you for the review. But not every journal does that. It depends on the journal. So here's some personal reflections of how I advanced my career with peer review. First of all, it's good to keep track of all the reviews that you've done, and you can put it on your CV, and you can just list that you've been a reviewer for international journals, and then list out the journals. Another good way to get credit is reviewer credits, and I've also attended a lot of conferences and had a lot of great chances to meet and interact with editors and get to know them, and then ask the editor to add my name to their reviewer database. And editors will remember good reviewers and keep inviting their reviewers to review papers. And it does help you in the long run. I think it helps you, to critically read the literature, and also when it comes time for you to submit a manuscript. I know the editors are, the reviewers are also authors, so we're all part of the same family. And finally, in closing, I'd like to briefly mention peer review and COVID-19. This past year in 2020 was a very special year. As I mentioned, that we had like a 300% increase in submissions at Integrative Zoology. I think a lot of the scientists around the world were publishing their backlogs. So not only are people's work schedules have been interrupted, there's a huge demand for reviewers right now, and it translates to delays in peer review. So Elsevier, if you follow this link, has a statement about COVID-19's impact on peer review, and they take a very flexible approach to this. They said that the systems will continue to remind you of the original timelines, but they'll try to be flexible and take into account the very different circumstances that people are experiencing. And then I published a couple papers in Springer Nature journals. And on every email, they have this at the end of the email that there are significant disruptions in the peer review process. And that researchers, they have difficulty meeting timelines even during normal times. So these are extraordinary times. So I'm very quick to give extensions to peer reviewers. If you think you're going to be late, you can ask for a formal extension, and that's just easy to put mark in the calendar on the manuscript handling server. But again, the reviewers will continue to be reminded on the original timeline, but will be highly flexible. So that's about it. I'd like to try to answer most of the questions as they're being asked, but if I know there's a lot of questions. Some of them were answered by reviewer credits. And I'd like to thank you all for your attention. And I'm going to go click on the questions button and see if there's any questions that I did not take during the webinar itself. Okay. Do you think it's useful to make reviews for journals that are on the Beals list? The Beals list, for those of you who don't know this list, it's a list of predatory journals. These are journals that they offer very quick reviews, and they usually charge article processing fees, and their goal is just to make money. And unfortunately, if you publish in the Beals list journals, a lot of institutions will not give you credit for your publication, and you will not be able to publish it in a reputable journal. So I would avoid the Beals list journals. It's tough. +1 scientific reports are wonderful journals, but the publications no longer count in the Chinese Academy of Sciences, which I think is maybe a little extreme. So Aruto Kagri asked, thanks for the talk. I have a question about the reviewer's score. Is there a point scale for an article reviewed by peer review? No, there's really no point scale at the journal. Typically, we'll just mark if the review was very useful, somewhat useful, or not useful, and then make a little mark about timeliness. I don't know for reviewer credits if there's like a rating or not, but I don't think there's a grades on reviews. So the answer would be no. I don't think there is a point scale. Aniko asked, could the email of the journal's editorial office be made automatic in the system when registering a review? Actually, you do get like a general email from the editorial office, but typically you'll have a personalized email from the handling editor or the editor-in-chief. And if you're not sure which email to register, I would use the editorial office, and usually that's a common shared email account from all the journal editors, and someone will be able to verify the review from the editorial office. You can also look up the name of the managing editor. It should be listed in the journal, so you can use them to upload your review with. There's some questions for Valeria that have been answered. Corrado asked in reviewing a paper if they did not follow recommendations given. I'm not really sure about that question. Plagiarism checking, that's done by the journal. Dr. Isra asked another question I didn't answer yet. This is, what if we wait a long period, 3 months, then we get a rejection according to the reviewer's report? When we read the report, we find out it talked about another paper, not ours. What happened with this good journal? Well, they might have made a huge mistake with the paper. I would contact the editorial office as soon as possible and straighten that out. And there's just a couple more questions I'll take before we go off the air. Lavoris asked, is a journal that begins with the only journal of the only peer-reviewed journals? I don't understand the question. Could you rephrase that question? I'll take your second question. Is editing the editor's responsibility to correct all grammar errors? I would say the answer is no. The editors are looking at the science. We want to make sure that the science is trustworthy. There are some errors that slip by. We do try to correct most of them, but ultimately, after the article is accepted, the article will be sent to the copy editor. And most journals like Wiley, Nature, Science, Elsevier, Journal of American Chemical Society, New England Journal of Medicine, they all have teams of copy editors that will go over and carefully copy edit the manuscript. Yeah, but if the paper requires a lot of editing, sometimes we'll send it back and ask them to revise it and try to enlist the help of a specialized editing service like R Upskill that offers that. But typically, if there's just a few mistakes, we might accept the paper anyways, and the copy editors will straighten it out. So we're about 5 minutes over. I wanted to thank everybody again. I don't know if Valeria would like to come back on and say thank you to everybody. But anyways, I'll just say a brief goodbye. Thank you for staying up late. You're on the Eastern Hemisphere, and thank you very much. And everybody should get a copy of this presentation. And good luck with all your publishing your papers and your future reviews. I hope you can get credit for all of them.
Thank you, everyone, from ReviewerCredits, and of course, as I wrote to you during the webinar and the chat, you can contact us at our email info@reviewercredits.com. And I really thank Mr. Jacob Wickham and, of course, Upskill and the whole Cactus Editor group to make this possible. Thank you to all, and have a good rest of the day wherever you are.